Welcome into Factfinder Investigates. I'm Dylan Doming. This week, a major update in the investigation into the tragedy involving Flight 5342. The NTSB releasing its preliminary report into the mid-air collision near Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. This week marking 6 weeks since that January 29th crash that killed 67 people. The American Airlines plane had departed from Wichita and was just seconds away from landing when it collided with an Army helicopter. Now, throughout this show, our investigative team digs into the NTSB's findings, how they are making urgent recommendations to the FAA, and how the FAA is already responding. We start with reporter Sean Logging breaking down what the NTSB calls serious safety concerns at the Reagan Airport.
A critical safety issue must be addressed without delay.
The NTSB laying out that there is still a lot its investigation has to learn about the mid-air collision of Flight 5342 from Wichita and an Army Black Hawk helicopter on January 29th.
The quickest part of the investigation is determining what happened. The part that takes longer is the how and why.
But making clear Tuesday, action is needed, detailing data it's collected of close proximity events at and near Reagan National Airport between planes and helicopters.
Half of the encounters we reviewed, again from 2011 through 2024, the helicopter may have been above the route altitude restriction.
Jennifer Hamady with the NTSB says at least once a month between 2011 and 2024, there was a traffic collision avoidance system alert requiring immediate action. And at Reagan National between October 2021 and December 2024,
there were 15,214 occurrences or close proximity events between commercial airplanes and helicopters,
with a risk of future collisions.
An intolerable risk to aviation safety.
The NTSB urgently recommends an end to a helicopter route east of Reagan National.
It shouldn't take a tragedy like this to occur. Unfortunately, one did, and so we are calling on action, but there clearly were indicators.
The preliminary report providing information on crew experience, history of the flights, and information from the recorders. The NTSB says those black boxes are where they still have a lot of work because of limits from the recorders on the Black Hawk.
Our team has a lot of work to do.
And those findings highlight the congested airspace around Reagan National has been a problem for years. It's why the NTSB this week made 2 urgent recommendations to the FAA to limit helicopters flying in that area. So the first recommendation is to ban helicopters flying on Route 4, while 2 runways, 15 and 33, are being used for planes landing and taking off. So if you look at this map, the NTSB asked to eliminate the highlighted helicopter flight path from Haynes Point, which is directly across the river from the airport, down to Wilson Bridge while planes are departing and arriving. That is the same route the Army Black Hawk helicopter was on when it collided with the plane. The second recommendation would be to find an alternative helicopter route when that segment of Route 4 is closed. And just days after those recommendations were made, the FAA did put permanent restrictions for helicopters flying while planes are near Reagan Airport. But DOT Secretary Sean Duffy questions why the FAA didn't make changes like this before the crash happened.
How did the FAA not know? How did they not study the data to say, hey, this is a hot spot, we're having near misses, and if we don't change our way, we're going to lose lives? That wasn't done. Maybe there was a focus on something other than safety.
So now the NTSB is looking into busy airspaces not only around Reagan National, but other airports across the country. So here are the next steps in their investigation. The NTSB says it will include flight simulators, interviews, and evaluating data that was captured by the aircraft's electronics. But a final report not expected on this for at least a year. And we're also hearing from a former NTSB board member who says he expects many more recommendations to be made to the FAA in the aftermath of the crash. The NTSB is able to make any recommendation they see fit, but there are factors that often limit the FAA's ability to act. The biggest factor being the cost. John Golio, who served on the NTSB board from 1995 to 2004, says once he made a recommendation that would have cost 7 figures, but it weighs heavily on the mind of NTSB board members to balance the cost of what they suggest and how timely it could be implemented by the FAA.
So it doesn't do us any good to send a recommendation to the FAA that we know, because of the cost is not going to get enacted.
Yeah.
So if we want to make an impact on safety, we need to scale that back and give them a recommendation that they can accomplish.
Now, legally, the FAA is required to do a cost-benefit analysis to prove that the benefits of change outweigh the price of it. And while Golia is no longer a board member, he said one suggestion he'd make to the FAA would be for daylight-only operations for one of the runways at Reagan Airport.
Runway 33, the one runway that they were lining up to, is a daylight-only operation, not nighttime. And the reason why I would say that is that whole eastern bank of the Potomac River there is so lit up because it's all government buildings. It is like daylight over there. It ruins your night vision. It makes it very, very difficult to come around.
And the NTSB said in their report that 2/3 of the incidents at Reagan Airport where a helicopter was too close and it triggered a traffic collision avoidance system advisory were reported at night. And while the NTSB has already laid out their next steps in the investigation, Kansas lawmakers are making sure all policies are thoroughly examined to prevent future tragedies. Later this month, Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas is holding a hearing to go over the preliminary findings. That hearing will take place on March 27th at 10 a.m. Senator Moran and a subcommittee will work to determine policy changes and what more can be done to make the airspace around Reagan Airport and other airports around the country less congested.
So by then, perhaps there will be more information. And in fact, the NTSB indicates in this preliminary report that they intend to do simulation and other tests to get additional information. The takeaway at the moment is the helicopters, when planes are landing or taking off, should not be in the path that they were in that night. And it was permissible for them to be there, but it shouldn't have been.
Now, legal action is also being taken by the families of the victims. Clifford Law Offices, which is in Chicago, last month filed a pre-case claim against the FAA and the U.S. Army for $250 million. It's also sent letters to American Airlines, regional carrier PSA, and others to preserve evidence in the mid-air crash. So to come and look at the response here locally following the crash, how our flight training schools teach aviation accidents, and how you all can still help support the victims' families.